The air inside the bunker at Firebase Eagles I was thick, a humid, suffocating blanket that smelled of stale sweat, moldering sandbags, and burnt cordite remnants from 3 nights prior. Specialist Rourke sat on an ammunition crate, the M16 leaning against his shoulder, waiting. Waiting was the war's cruelest duality. It stretched time into molasses, slowing the heart rate until the sudden, violent bursts of action felt less like combat and more like electric shocks. Rourke, 23, carried the weight of a recent, undeserved promotion, squad leader, thrust upon him when Lieutenant Morales' original sergeant was medically evacuated. This new authority did little to stem the gnawing anxiety born from the last letter he received. A terse, 2-paragraph dispatch from his father, a retired Marine colonel, subtly questioning Rourke's lack of distinction in the field. "We trust you are contributing meaningfully," it read, and not simply marking time. The silence outside the wire was a lie. Rourke knew it masked 100,000 unseen movements. To combat this silence, and to combat the disappointment he felt radiating from 10,000 miles away, Rourke was composing a letter of his own. It was a masterpiece of fictionalized valor. He described their last insignificant patrol, a 4-hour sweep that yielded nothing but leeches, as Operation Ironclad, a successful deep jungle probe that had supposedly discovered and neutralized a critical NVA staging area and supply cache. He went into excruciating fictional detail, mentioning specific invented grid coordinates, BT 441-893, where the action took place, lending a horrifying verisimilitude to his invention. He wrote of suppressing heavy fire, using flanking maneuvers, and personally securing documents that High Command was now treating as intelligence gold. The truth was, Rourke hadn't even fired a full clip in 2 weeks. He finished the letter, sealing the envelope with a fervent hope that the lie would be sufficient to finally earn a flicker of pride from his rigid, distant father. He named the operation Ironclad because, in his mind, the lie had to be unbreakable. He handed the letter off to Private First Class Dixon, instructing him to ensure it made the next mail run out of the base, unaware that the very coordinates he invented were about to be weaponized against him. The letter, stamped personal mail, moved through the established logistics chain, eventually reaching the company administration tent, a flimsy structure prone to the persistent moisture of the monsoon season. Private Jenkins, the company clerk, was a man perpetually in debt due to a disastrous addiction to poker and local rice wine. Jenkins was also responsible for ensuring all outbound mail passed preliminary review, a cursory scan to ensure no strategic information was leaking, though most sensors focused on morale and personal safety. Rourke's letter was too thick, too detailed, and too boastful to be ignored. Jenkins, spotting the mention of Ironclad and the specific grid coordinates, BT 441-893, paused. He wasn't a patriot, but he was desperate for money. He had a covert arrangement with a local laundry service contractor, an elderly man named Ong Tang, who was rumored to be deeply connected to NVA intelligence networks operating near the perimeter. Jenkins reasoned that if this specific area, this precise grid square, was truly where a major supply cache had been neutralized, then perhaps a follow-up operation was imminent. In his mind, Rourke's letter wasn't a lie. It was a premature leak of genuine, classified intelligence, inflated for personal vanity. He carefully copied the coordinates onto a piece of field paper, subtly replacing Rourke's sealed envelope in the pouch. Later that evening, under the guise of trading cigarettes for laundry services, Jenkins passed the fabricated coordinates to Ong Tang, emphasizing the strategic importance Rourke had imbued in the fictional report. He received a hefty sum of scrip and a promise of immunity from his gambling debts. The NVA command structure, operating on the principle that the enemy often confirms its own intelligence, took the intercepted information seriously. Why would a low-level soldier invent such specific, tactical detail unless it was based on an imminent objective? They immediately dispatched a battalion element to the area around BT 441-893, not to retrieve a cache, but to establish an elaborate, highly fortified kill zone. a classic L-shaped ambush designed for maximum lethality against an expected American sweep. The duality of waiting shattered 3 days later with the sudden, sharp summons from the Tactical Operations Center, TOC. Rourke was called in, not for disciplinary action regarding the questionable contents of his mail, but for a mission brief. Lieutenant Morales, a career soldier whose trust was hard-won, pointed to a map centered precisely over the coordinates Rourke had invented, BT 441-893. Intelligence confirms high-value enemy activity in this precise sector. Dog Company, Morales stated, his voice tight with anticipation. We've been tasked with a deep reconnaissance patrol, 3 clicks past the established line of demarcation. We're looking for any follow-up evidence regarding a suspected NVA munitions depot. The mission is designated Operation Blackbird, a direct follow-up to previous reports of a significant find in the sector. Rourke felt a cold, paralyzing dread claw its way up his throat. The fabrication, designed solely to impress his father, was now the blueprint for a genuine military operation. He looked at the map, seeing his lie translated into lethal reality. Morales misinterpreted Rourke's sudden pallor as serious dedication. Good man, Rourke. You look like you already know this ground. Prep your men. 3-day sweep. We move out at 0400. The irony was grotesque. Rourke knew the ground better than anyone, precisely because he had invented every detail of its importance. The waiting had ended, replaced by an urgent, unavoidable deployment toward a fate predicated entirely on his vanity. He tried desperately to interject, to suggest the intel might be faulty, to argue the terrain was too rugged for a motorized advance. But Morales was energized by the high-value nature of the mission. Rourke understood the chain reaction. The lie had gained independent momentum, interpreted as reality by the intelligence community, and now his command had validated the fiction by assigning an operation to it. He gathered his squad, forced to brief them on the strategic importance of an area that, until 3 days ago, existed only in his fictionalized correspondence. The 4-day movement into the deep sector was a grueling education in dread. The squad, comprised of seasoned veterans like Sergeant Clay and fresh replacements like Private Doyle, moved through triple canopy jungle, the heat pressing down with the physical weight of a tombstone. Every few hundred yards, Rourke found himself mentally checking the fabricated map details he had included in his letter. The small stream he'd invented as a strategic water source, the ridge line he'd described as a perfect observation point. He recognized them all, confirming the chilling reality of his fate. Rourke attempted subtle sabotage, suggesting deviations from the planned route, arguing that the eastern approach offered better cover. Lieutenant, Rourke pleaded, wiping sweat and jungle muck from his eyes. The main avenue of approach is too exposed on that central track. We should swing wide. Morales was adamant, holding the map like gospel. Negative, Rourke. Command want a thorough sweep of the primary grid square first. No deviations. That's where the initial action took place. The deeper they went, the more the surrounding jungle seemed to coalesce into a silent, anticipatory presence. Rourke's physical exhaustion was secondary to the mental torment. Every snapping twig or unseen shadow was a manifestation of the ambush he knew was inevitable. He carried the full burden of their shared fate, a silent traitor leading his own men to the executioner. He started seeing signs, disturbances in the thick foliage that only an expected target would warrant. The almost imperceptible indentation of a recently dug foxhole, the unnatural silence of the local bird population, the single, expertly placed piece of debris meant to mask a clearing. The weight of the M16 on his shoulder felt like a penance, a useless tool against a trap already sprung 3 days before, in a moment of selfish literary invention back at the Firebase. As they crossed the designated perimeter Rourke had invented, the signs intensified from subtle suggestions to blatant warnings. They were not merely passing through a patrol area, they were entering a carefully manicured kill zone. Rourke halted the squad near a small, overgrown clearing, the precise location he had written about where heavy contact was made. The area should have been wild, untamed jungle, but instead, the fields of fire were strangely clear, almost surgically pruned. Rourke pointed to a line of thick bamboo, noting the expertly severed tips, the kind of cut that allowed an NVA soldier to have a perfect sight line from an elevated position without giving away his own cover. "Lieutenant Morales," Rourke whispered urgently, the humidity making the words stick in his throat. "We need to pull back now. This isn't just enemy presence. This is an organized reception. They're expecting us. Look at the ground." He indicated a series of almost invisible depressions, likely the remains of tripwires that had been carefully removed just before their arrival, meaning the trap setters were still nearby and watching. Morales, however, was focused on proving the mission's value. "We're here to confirm intelligence, Rourke, not scare ourselves back to the wire. If they're dug in, that confirms the value of the target. We maintain the patrol line and move with extreme caution. We need to find the damn cache." Rourke argued with a frantic edge, fueled by the guilt that threatened to overwhelm him. But Morales, citing his rank and the mission parameters, shut him down. The silence of the jungle was suddenly not oppressive, but deafening, the calculated stillness before the explosion. Rourke knew, with absolute certainty, that the NVA were not scattered guerrillas. They were a coordinated, patient force, positioned exactly where Rourke had told them to wait, courtesy of his fabricated letter and Jenkins' desperate greed. He moved his men forward, every step a confession of imminent failure and calculated betrayal. The ambush detonated precisely at 14:15 hours, initiated not by a rifle shot, but by the horrific, tearing sound of a command-detonated claymore mine concealed beneath the roots of a giant banyan tree, the coordinates of which Rourke had falsely claimed as a rally point. The force of the blast tore the front of the patrol, instantly eliminating Lieutenant Morales and Private Dixon, the two men closest to Rourke. The initial blast was followed immediately by a synchronized torrent of AK-47 fire and heavy machine gun chatter coming from three distinct, elevated positions, forming the deadly L shape. The NVA had zeroed in their positions, exploiting the natural terrain features Rourke had meticulously described. Rourke reacted instinctively, throwing himself behind the scarred trunk of a fallen log, screaming orders that were instantly drowned out by the noise. The chaos was absolute, hot brass flying everywhere, the smell of burnt gunpowder mixing with the raw scent of spilled blood and ruptured earth. While Rourke desperately tried to coordinate a counterfire pattern, he heard a wounded, screaming man, Private First Class Dixon, clutching a massive wound in his side, shout, "Why, Rourke? Why did you bring us here?" Jenkins was talking about Colonel Rourke's son's big score. "You told them exactly where to wait." Dixon's raw accusation cut through the noise of the battle like a scalpel. Rourke froze, the horror of the exposed lie momentarily overshadowing the necessity of combat. The enemy fire intensified, realizing they had pinned the remaining squad members. Rourke was not only leading the defense, he was fighting the ghosts of his own colossal error. The realization that his vanity had translated into the blood of his men was a paralyzing guilt that threatened to swallow him whole, even as he fought to survive. Driven by the immediate need for survival and the crushing weight of guilt, Rourke snapped back into action. The raw combat transformed him. He stopped thinking about the lie and focused only on the geometric reality of the trap. They were pinned between a high ground position, the short side of the L, and the main ambush line, the long side. Survival meant suppressing the long side and using smoke to break contact from short side. Rourke emptied a magazine into the suspected machine gun nest, forcing them to duck, then immediately triggered a flare and called in for immediate supportive artillery fire, a risky maneuver given their proximity to the target. He grabbed the remaining operational radio and, his voice shaking but clear, laid out a complex fire mission based on the precise and now cursed coordinates. He knew the NVA would press hard. This trap was personalized and perfectly executed. Private Doyle, a scared 18-year-old replacement, was frozen, his rifle unfired. Rourke kicked dirt into Doyle's face. "Move! Lay down suppression, Doyle. You stop shooting, we die." Rourke took charge of the remaining 5 men, coordinating a brutal, inch-by-inch retreat using covering fire and the thick jungle cover they were supposed to be sweeping. He recognized the NVA commander's sophistication. They weren't rushing. They were patient, letting the jungle and the fear do half their work. Rourke utilized the enemy's patience against them, throwing fragmentation grenades into areas he had identified as optimal cover spots in his fabricated report. He fought with a desperate, self-punishing ferocity, as if trying to physically absorb every bullet meant for his men, a living monument to his failure. After 40 agonizing minutes, Rourke managed to break contact, leading the ragged remnants of the patrol 300 yards back to a temporary perimeter behind a dense thicket of elephant grass. The silence returned, but this time it was a gasping, punctuated quiet broken only by the whimpering of the wounded. They had 5 survivors, 2 of whom were walking wounded, and 3 definitive casualties, including Morales and Dixon, and, devastatingly, Private Jenkins, the clerk who had monetized the lie, who had joined the patrol as a last-minute runner. Jenkins was lying propped against a tree, massive trauma to his abdomen, bleeding out into the dark earth. The medic, Private Chavez, was frantic, running low on supplies. Rourke knelt beside Jenkins. The clerk, delirious and fading, stared up at Rourke, his eyes glazed with pain and fear. "I shouldn't have done it, Rourke," Jenkins whispered, his breath catching. "The colonel, your letter, I thought it was real. I sold the map. I'm sorry, Rourke Kropka." The confession, offered in the final moments of a dying man, sealed Rourke's moral fate. The chain of events was now undeniable. Rourke's desperate need for validation, Jenkins' desperate need for money, and the calculated, lethal efficiency of the NVA. Rourke simply nodded, the denial freezing in his throat. He had no words of absolution or comfort for the man whose greed, coupled with his own vanity, had authored this disaster. Jenkins went slack moments later. Rourke felt a heavy, cold numbness replace the panic. The price of his pride was measured in body bags and the vacant stare of the fallen. He had survived the immediate combat, but the spiritual battle had just begun, a confrontation with a truth that was far uglier than any jungle firefight. The extraction was a harrowing, rushed affair. The dust-off choppers arrived under sustained, sporadic NVA fire, forcing the crew chief to make a hot landing in the cramped clearing. Rourke supervised the loading of the wounded, then the grim, heavy work of securing the bodies of Morales, Dixon, and Jenkins. The journey back to Firebase Eagles, I was defined by the relentless, rhythmic whomp-whomp-whomp of the helicopter blades, a mechanical heartbeat drowning out all thought and memory. Rourke sat hunched, staring at the body bag containing Morales, the lieutenant who had blindly trusted Rourke's fabricated intelligence. The silence in the cabin was profound, a vacuum created by the violence they had just escaped. Rourke felt the physical fatigue of the fight, the scrapes, the bruises, the ringing in his ears, but the true exhaustion was mental. He had to write the report. The duality now was between duty and confession. He could report the ambush as a standard, unexpected contact, a regrettable loss of good men due to superior enemy positioning, and maintain his survival and his career. Or he could confess the lie, face a court-martial, and potentially lose everything, including the already fragile relationship with his father, but perhaps gain a momentary release from the crushing guilt. As the chopper lifted away from the steaming jungle and banked toward the firebase, Rourke knew the combat was over, but the internal waiting, the anticipation of the moral judgment, was only just beginning. Back at Firebase Eagle's Eye, the immediate administrative necessities consumed Rourke. He was debriefed, showered, and offered a ration of lukewarm coffee and lukewarm platitudes. Then came a mandatory after-action report, AR. Rourke sat alone in the small administrative tent, the scent of fresh paper and bureaucracy utterly disconnected from the stench of the jungle battlefield. He meticulously detailed the ambush, the L-shaped formation, the enemy numbers, the valor of the defense, and the high-value nature of the grid square, BT 441-893, which the action had, tragically, confirmed. He upheld the narrative. He described Morales' leadership in Dixon's final acts of bravery. He omitted Jenkins' dying confession. He buried the single, catastrophic truth. The genesis of the operation was his own self-aggrandizing lie. Rourke signed the AR, certifying the document as an accurate, if censored, account of the events. He had chosen survival over truth, realizing that confession would not bring back the dead, but only destroy the living survivors. He had successfully navigated the combat, but he was now irrevocably trapped in the stillness of the lie. Later that evening, he wrote a final letter, not to his father, whose approval no longer mattered, but to his mother. It was brief, devoid of all military jargon or ambition. It simply read, "I'm alive. The price for that fact was too high, and the silence here is deafening." He sealed the envelope, understanding that the echoes from the Ia Drang Valley would not fade with the cessation of fire, but would instead resonate forever in the quiet, empty spaces between the lines of his final, carefully constructed lie.